welcome to part 2 of our VMware Workstation 17 Building a Nested Lab. In this particular session, we're going to be going over the software install pieces, less slides, only 4 slides today. Hooray! We're going to do installation and setup of Windows 11, Workstation 17, and just a little bit of a hardware review to show you some of the choices I've made to get this system up and running. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. All right, so overall series goals. We're building a nested vSphere 8 vSAN ESA cluster on VMware Workstation 17. Underlying OS is Windows 11. We're going to build out 3 nested ESXi 8 hosts, 1 VCSA, and 1 Windows 2022 server for Active Directory and things of that. Networking is all going to be private and should be able to run VMs on the ESXi nested hosts. The nested environment should perform smoothly or some of the other goals we have across this series. Okay, today's agenda is part 2. All right, pretty soon coming up, the next one, part 3, we'll be talking about setting up the Windows 2022 server, which is the first thing we need to do. Then part 4, we're going to cover setting up the VCSA, which is the vCenter server. Then our ESXi hosts, setting up the ESXi, the vSphere environment, getting ESA going, and then doing some performance testing. So a lot to do. We're only on part 2. Let's get going with it. All right, today's agenda, I'm going to give you a quick hardware review, just an overview of some of the choices I made for the system I'm going to be installing this on. We're going to install Windows 11 and install Workstation 17. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, I can do this, I don't need to watch this video, great, move on. However, there are some tips and tricks here that folks run into that they forget to do, so you might want to watch it just for those tips alone. All right, so let's go into the hardware review, starting now. All right, let's do a quick hardware overview. We're looking at the Dell 7820 here, the Precision Workstation, right? In the front here, we've got 2 boot drives, which is a 400 gig boot drive SSD, and paired next to it is a 3 terabyte SSD. Then directly above it is a 600 gig Optane disk, followed by another 600 gig Optane disk here as well. So plenty of disk. So we're going to boot off of this drive. We're going to put some data on this one. We're going to use these 2, probably one for VCSA and one for the Active Directory controller, just because I have them, right? But then inside, we've got 3 Optane disks. There's 3 here on these red converters, and what those are going to be for is the actual ESXi hosts. So we'll put host 1, host 2, and host 3 on these. These are 1.5 terabytes apiece. We've got the 6242 Optane, correction, Xeon, Intel Xeon processor here with 24 cores, and a total of 256 gigs of RAM. It also has a simple Quattro video card in here, and then down below in here, you can barely see it, is a 4-port Broadcom NIC. Now this host typically is used for my physical ESA cluster, but this is one of the things that makes this Precision great, is I can use this for a dedicated ESXi host, or I can install Windows 11 onto it and use it for a workstation. Very flexible, and I think it's a really good building block, this particular system, to start out with. Maybe you just want to get started, right? We'll come in and get started with like a silver processor that has plenty of cores and plenty of power to run Workstation. Maybe you pop in 128 gigs of RAM, get going. Instead of doing these Optane disks, maybe you put in their NVMe controller in here, which houses 4 different NVMe drives. Well, you're about ready to go. You're set, right? And then as you move forward and you want to make this into a physical host, you make a few alterations here, maybe to the networking and things like that, and you're good to go. So it's a really good building block to start with. They're relatively affordable. They're not affordable as buying an older server, but then again, they're very quiet. There's other advantages to it. They don't burn as much power. But just a quick hardware overview. This is the hardware we're going to be using to install Workstation on. And now let's go ahead and get started with the software installation pieces. Okay, the next thing we need to do is prepare a Windows bootable USB stick. At least that's what I prefer to do when installing Windows 11. The tool I like to use is Rufus, and you can download it here at rufus.ie/en, or language of your choice. I'm sure it'll auto-populate. But get this program downloaded and get it installed. It can be installed locally just as a file that you can run, and it looks like this. right? So I went ahead and downloaded my Windows 11 consumer editions, because all I'm really targeting here is Pro or Pro for Workstation, right? That's what I want to install here. Get this ISO downloaded, and then use Rufus, right? It sees our 32 gig drive. We're going to redo this one here, our format over top of it. I'm going to choose my ISO. Okay, that's this guy right there. Okay. Once it's chosen, it's auto-populated, right? All you do is click on Start. Now here's where Rufus shines, and this is a really good tip for folks trying to install Windows 11. You can remove the requirements for RAM and Secure Boot and TPM, which is great. You can remove the requirements for an online account. I can create an account, set regional settings, skip the data questions, right? And also disable the BitLocker auto protection, which that's what a lot of us are looking for with Windows 11. Not all of us, but at a home use with Windows 11, you're probably looking for these options. Choose the options that are appropriate for your system, right? So I'm going to choose OK to this, and it's going to go ahead and kick it off. Give me a warning that, hey, I'm going to destroy the data. That's fine, and it's going to go. Now this is going to complete. Once it's done, then I can take this USB stick, insert it into that Dell 7820, boot it up, and we'll go through that installation here in just a bit. All right, let's start the installation of Windows 11. Now I'm on the Precision 78 tower here, and I pushed F12 to boot up to get into where I can start looking at it. And what I want to do is I actually want to start in the BIOS setup. So let's go there first. And then after we're done making a few key changes in the BIOS, we're going to boot to the USB stick that we set up with Windows 11. So the one thing we want to do is we want to look in for, in this case, in virtualization support, right? And VT virtualization support right here should be enabled, checkbox, okay? For Intel processors, it's the same as the VTXD trigger that has to be enabled. VT for IO direct IO, excuse me. Check that box as well. And trusted execution doesn't necessarily need to be checked. But now your BIOS settings may vary, but really what you're looking for is it might have a specific section for virtualization support, or you might have to go into the CPU area and actually check off that VTXD checkbox to make sure it's enabled. This is the #1 area of failure with Workstation, is that someone hasn't gone in here and checked this box. So with that check, let's go to our boot sequence and let's change this to actually our disk that we want to boot from. Let's see. We don't want to boot from VMware. We don't want to boot from there. And SanDisk. That's the disk right there. It is. Okay, good. Let's click Apply. Okay. And now we're going to exit, and now we're ready to reboot. So the system's going to go through a reboot cycle. Once it does, we'll pick back up. All right, the system is rebooted, and as you can see, it's at its one-time boot menu. So we're going to go ahead and choose the SanDisk to boot from, okay, because that's my USB stick, and it'll actually start booting. Now we're going to overwrite the ESXi installation on this system. Not a problem. We're going to use this system for Workstation right now, and then later on I'll come back around and we'll format again. So I'm going to let this USB key boot, and then we'll get going in a second. All right, so it's fully booted. Let's go through the Windows installation. Standard checkboxes here. English US. Install now. All right, updates, license agreement, next, custom. Okay, so I'm going to delete out all these partitions because I definitely don't want them hanging around. Yep. We'll have to clear out here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out all these partitions, then we'll resume the video. All right, so the drive I want to target is that 400 gig drive. I'm going to go ahead and choose that drive, click Next. And it's going to go through its process for getting it installed. Now we're going to allow it to install, and after it boots back into the Windows operating system, then that time we'll go through the other changes we need to make to prepare it for Workstation to be installed. All right, let's go ahead and finish up the installation here. So basically, after boot, it came up with a internet connection. Let's connect to the network. That's fine. Okay, so what you're seeing here is it's going to do is going to go through and check for updates, and then actually update the installation here as we're moving forward. All right, so it's finishing up the install now as it's going to boot in and go through your basic stuff as it's completing its install. If you've seen this screen before, basically it's going to take another 3 or 4 minutes to actually get to the operating screen. All right, and we're all done. So a couple things we want to do right out of the gate with this guy. We're going to want to go into, I believe it's computer. There we go, screen adjusting. All right, we're going to want to go into computer management here. And we're going to want to look at our device manager and see what it didn't get. So it looks like it has a couple things here underneath the RAID controller that it didn't quite identify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install some drivers and get this corrected. You should do this on any new installation. So I'm going to get this squared up. And when I get done squared up, then we're going to go in. We're going to start looking at the other things we need to check, such as the Hyper-V, to have that disabled. To allow for nesting VMs in Workstation will be the next thing we check on. Just wanted to show you a little trick here with Dell Support Assist. What's actually nice about it, if you go to the Dell page for the 7820, not only will it detect the different drivers you need, but it'll also download, install them, and get everything up and running. Now, one of them has a BIOS update, which we're going to apply and do the restart. And then this system should be ready to start it. Let us start configuring it, getting it ready for Workstation. As you can see here, the RAID issues we had prior are all now resolved. All the components in Windows 11 are good to go. And now we're actually ready to start the installation of Workstation 17. But before we do that, there's a couple things we need to check with Hyper-V. All right, the firmware update's complete and the drivers are all done. The next thing I want to do is establish all my hard disks, or I'm sorry, NVMe and U.2 drives. So I'm going to go up here to disk management, and I want to make sure that all the drives are recognized and are operational. So there's quite a bit of disks in this system, so I'm going to choose OK. Let it do its thing. Let's expand this a little bit. You can see there's quite a bit of drives here. We're have plenty of space to do stuff. Right, so let's go ahead and start making these simple volumes up. Okay, E, we're going to call this one 37 TB drive. Okay. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going to establish all these different disks for different purposes. So in this case here, when we do this drive, let's go back. I'm going to call this ESXi 101. Whoop. Okay, and I'll do the same with the other drives. Whoop. Not typing very well today. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, now I got it. All right. So that's the one drive. Let's go ahead. Now what I'm going to do is going to make this guy 101. This guy I'm going to make 202. And you don't have to do it this way. I'm just doing this because it helps remind me where I have those different nested hosts installed. It just makes it a little bit easier, right? To remind me where things are and that type of stuff. And this will be the last one right here. Next. Next. Okay. And this one's 103. Now these last two U.2 drives, 600 gigs apiece, I'm going to call this the Active Directory controller on one and the VCSA on the other. Might as well. I have the space, so we might as well use it up, right? So let's call this AD VM, something like that, right? And this guy here. We'll call this VCSA VM. Now, you don't have to do it the way I'm doing it. In fact, these drives will work well. Probably could put all the all the VMs on one drive, and it probably would handle it without a problem. But now we've got everything established, right? We've got our boot disk set up. We've got our E drive, which has some extra space on it, and then we've got our other our other drives set up for different things. So we're ready to start looking into getting Workstation installed. Now, I'm going to do it wrong the first time to show you what the error is, and there's nothing wrong with doing it this way. If I wanted to, I could go in and disable the Hyper-V componentry first, and then Workstation would have no issues when I'm building VMs. But let's go ahead and install the Workstation Workstation program now, and then I'll show you what the error looks like when Hyper-V is installed. All right, let's go through the Workstation install here. It's pretty simple, not too difficult at all. Okay, so it looks like it's going to require a reboot to the system for a distribution that has to go in. We'll say yes, and let's let it restart, and we'll pick it back up. All right, so now that it's fully rebooted and logged back in, I went ahead and clicked on the VMware installer and restarted the installation here. Okay, so let's go ahead and click next. Agreement, next. Okay, don't need enhanced keyboard features. You can choose if you want to do these or not. One's for product updates, check for them. Others join the CEIP program. Okay, icons, no big deal. Install. So let's go ahead and let it get through its install here. Okay, it looks like it's just about finished up. Okay, just finishing a few things. At this point, if you have a license, you can enter it to get it going. So I'm fine on that, so I'm going to click Finish for now. And Workstation is installed, as you can see here. So we're ready to go. All right, so let's move on to the next step, which is showing the error that Hyper-V brings up and how to get rid of that. All right, so as I clicked on the VMware Workstation icon, it asked me if you want to put in a license key or try for 30 days. So we're going to go with try for 30 days and actually allow it to come up and start working. All right, and here it is. So let's go ahead and get Workstation open here. As you can see, I've got two VMs here. If we look at the ESXi 7 VM, which is a VM that I created by just going in here and saying new virtual machine, right? Say next. Okay, choose an ESXi 7 and finishing it up. No big deal, right? So what's going on is if we look at it here, right, we go to the processors, you can see that the VT-X, okay, is checkmarked, and it needs to be because it's nested virtualization. That needs to be exposed to the hypervisors so that it can do the VMs and everything else that it needs to do with that. Without that checked, it won't run properly. So that definitely needs to be checked. The problem is when I try and start it up here, we'll start to get some errors. There it is. So the VT-X is not supported on this platform, which seems to be odd, right? So you'd think, well, maybe I need to look at my BIOS, but we already covered that base, right? Everything was working fine. What it turns out is that Hyper-V is installed on this system, and that's the problem. Now, by default, Hyper-V isn't installed on fresh installs. However, what a lot of people like to do is install the flavor of Linux on it to do the Linux pieces with Windows 11. And when you do that, that actually installs Hyper-V and then can cause conflicts for Workstation. So they could be running Workstation for a long time. It's working great, no issues. They go in and install the Linux pieces for Microsoft Windows 11, and the next thing you know, their hypervisors aren't booting. So what you'll want to do is you want to make sure that it actually is not installed if you want to do nested virtualization, which can be a bit of a conflict, but hey, guess what? If you really need Linux, run it in Workstation, right? So let's take a look here. What we're going to do is here, I'm going to show you how to disable it real quick. Okay, so turn features on and off. You're going to want to uncheck Hyper-V right here, but you're also want to go scroll down to the bottom and see if this box here, Windows Hypervisor Platform, is checked. You want to uncheck both of those, choose OK, and then the system is going to go through what it needs to do and actually do a restart. Once it's restarted and done, we should be good to go. We should be able to start this VM and we can move forward. So folks, that's what I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed this session. In the next session, we'll go through setting up the networking and Workstation and actually getting our shell VMs up and running. Thank you so much, everybody. Do hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.